Hi, film friends. This is Mike White. I'm actually a video and film professor from Wayne State College in Wayne, Nebraska. I actually live in Sioux City, Iowa, and I'm an active participant on the Iowa Film page. Due to some conversation we had, people had asked, I'd kind of asked what kind of tutorials people would be interested in through the holidays, and there's several that came up, and one of them was on screenwriting. So I'll kind of go through that a little bit. I'll try not to get too wordy. I don't want it to seem like an academic lecture, so I'll make it kind of informal. Um, my background is actually not as a screenwriter, although I love screenwriting and have been a screenwriter for quite some time. But I actually started in commercial production back in the 1990s, and I did local television as well as national television campaigns for advertising for products. I worked on several products, which I think they would probably prefer I not mention, but things that you would know. I worked on those. I am a published writer and have been for many years. Actually, for a period of time, I worked for Zooey Deschanel's magazine, doing some writing for them, and did some other things as well. So. But I want to preface this first with I'm a production guy. So my knowledge of the industry started out on the production side, doing production, and then of course I obviously became more of a writer. And I love screenwriting. I love films. I love these things, and I've been a student of screenwriting for a long time. I do not have an MFA from one of the major film schools or any of those things as well. Although I've worked with many people who do, and I admire their advice, and I love working with them. Some of my dearest friends do that. But I'm a production guy who also does screenwriting, and I feel like I know it pretty well. I have worked on several films and did produce a feature last year and working on another feature right now. Of course, I write a lot of stuff, and I work with writers all the time. My students win top screenwriting awards all the time, and they get into some of the top schools. So I do mentor writers every week, all day long, all the time. So just a little bit of my background. I think first of all, the big tip I would have people is become a student. And I don't mean actually enrolling in school, although that's a great idea, but I think be a student of film, and I think you want to start by watching great things. I know that's sometimes a little bit outside of people's comfort zone. Oh, I really like this or I really like that, but I think a good place to start is looking at prestigious film festivals that win awards. People will say, "Oh boy, I'd love to get a film into Sundance." Well, do you really understand the kinds of films that get into Sundance, and what are those films, and what are they like? Or South by, what kind of films do they accept? They aren't science fiction, horror movies frequently. They're basically narrative drama, narrative fiction. Not to say that those films don't do well, but I mean, those festivals are looking for very specific things. So I mean, I think you need to understand that. So by watching great things, you can understand that. And I would start with like Film Independent, take a look at the Independent Spirit Awards, maybe look at the films that win awards, and maybe kind of study those films. I know A Marriage Story, which I've talked about in my last video, that script was just made available. It's a really good thing to study that. That Noah Baumbach's probably the top screenwriter in the country. He is very respected internationally. So studying scripts, that's something that you can do to go ahead and do that and study great work. Kind of branch out and watch great things. I think that's really important. I think one of the most important things for writers is to understand what your own process is. I have students say, if I had a nickel for everybody who came and said, "Oh, I got an idea for a movie," I said, "Well, show me a script." You don't have a movie until you have a script. It's an idea. Until it's on paper, until it's stapled together and it's coherent and put together with instructions, you don't have a movie. You don't have a script. You don't have it until I can hold it in my hand and physically look at it. So, I mean, you have to understand your process. And there's everybody's got ideas. Ideas aren't worth anything unless they're written down. So you need to understand your process and how you get there. And your process will be very different than my process. I know that I like to write in crowded places. I like to write in cafes where there's lots of activity, but I like to wear headphones while I do that, because it's the mix of that activity and the isolation that make me want to write, make me want to work. I know I write better early in the morning than late at night. I know I tend to write mood based on what I'm listening to. I know that. I know I contemplate writing while I drive. When I'm driving, I am constantly writing. I am thinking and writing and driving at the same time because it's that active thing. I like to write orally. I like to stand in a room and give the dialogue orally before I write it down. But this came from writing for a really long period of time. And I mean, I've been writing for 25 years and I write constantly. So I think part of that is understanding what your own process is. I have students sometimes say, well, I have writer's block. That's a crock of crap. If you're a writer, you don't have writer's block. It's a crock of crap. You sit down and you write. That's it. You sit down and you write. You might not write anything good, but you write. And I think getting into that habit of writing and writing all the time and writing, every day, if it fits in your schedule, writing every day. I know for a fact that I write for 3 to 4 hours every single Sunday. I sit down and I write every Sunday, no matter what, for 3 or 4 hours. I have an extraordinary amount of unpublished things. I have an extraordinary amount of unproduced things, but I'm writing because, I'm a writer. I mean, in my mind, that's who I am. I'm a writer. So I'm writing all of the time. So I think that's one of the important things. You need to be a voyeuristic listener. I can pretty much guarantee that if I'm sitting in a restaurant eating alone, and I do that a lot, I can guarantee you I am listening to the conversation of the people who are around me. As a matter of fact, The Ghost in Her actually came from a situation like that. It was in a record store and overheard someone talking. And then I went back and then I wrote the screenplay. At that time, it was a short story. I wrote the short story, which was later adapted into a screenplay, based on a conversation that I had overheard. And you learn, and you're not just looking for content, but you're looking for, beats and quips, and I'll cover that in a little bit. But you need to become kind of a voyeuristic listener to understand how people speak and how they speak to each other. And it's that kind of simplicity there as well. And you've got to kind of be daring. You can't be afraid of having someone make fun of your work. You can't be afraid of, putting having yourself be seen in your work or any of those things. People will, and even if the things you're writing seem like they have nothing to do with you, people will project that on you and say, "Oh, well, it's you. That's blah 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 blah," or whatever it is. But I mean, if you're going to write anything of any substance, you've got to be a little daring. So I mean, I think that's part of it too. Let me talk a little bit about ideas. I think that's the case too. It seems like every student I run into, 11th or 12th grade, they always say, "Oh, I have this great idea. I'm making a zombie movie." And then, of course, you have student film festivals. They're inundated with zombie movies. The first impulse is probably not your best impulse. Okay, so it's like, okay, well, I want to make a zombie movie. What is that movie about? Are we just making a trope? What is it about? So, I think if you look at great fantasy or science fiction or any of those things, it's really about the human drama which unfolds. People talked about The Walking Dead, and The Walking Dead was great, but The Walking Dead, that first season was a human drama set in, this world that we know a lot about. We see that dystopian world a lot. But the trick is to tell a really, really unique story, because the first thing is like, oh, it's another zombie movie, right? So, it's to tell this really unique story. So when you come out with an idea, say it out loud and atomize it down to maybe like a sentence and say, well, this is my idea. It's about such and such, such and such. And if it sounds compelling, that's great. But if it sounds like a poor idea or a dumb idea or an undeveloped idea, it may not be your best strategy. So then we want to go back and, maybe try to do that and then pitch it to yourself. Go ahead and say, okay, well, if I had to convince people to work on this project or give money to the project, what would I say about it that would make it sound different and sound compelling and sound like something people would want to watch? So you have to kind of pitch it to yourself. For me, a lot of my stuff is, because I tend to do things which are paid on distribution, is that people commit to my projects because they like the writing and they like what I'm trying to say. So in writing something, I'm always like, well, what is it I'm trying to say? It was like we had a technical problem when we made The Ghost in Her, and everybody wanted to come back to the project because they liked the story so well. It was the same situation, with Everfall, and the script went out, and I had, actors come clear from Minnesota to Sioux City, Iowa to go ahead and do this because they liked the script that well, because they liked what I was trying to say. So if you have the right story, people will commit themselves to your project, paid or unpaid, and then the project's going to be easier to produce. So I think that's something that you need to consider. Um, when we talk about having an original take on something, that's not to say that you can't do it. I looked at Booksmart the other day. Such a great film, but that film could have been really totally botched. I mean, it could have been like a completely botched film, but the execution is so good in it. And it's a little bit of a unique voice, but that's the thing. That's the thing about that is, is this a different take on that? We've seen that movie a million times. It's a John Hughes movie almost, so we've seen it a million times. It's just that different take. So I think you can definitely do that. And now we're getting to that point with superhero movies. People are bored with them because they're telling the same stories over and over again. So I think that's kind of the situation with that. So can you tell it in some unique way? When Lady Bird was produced, everyone loved Lady Bird because it was basically a female empowerment story, but a very different one, spoke with a different voice. So as a writer, if you're that strong enough writer and have that different voice, you can definitely. So I think you need to think about the objectives of your work too. Am I making a film that's going to further my career? In some way, is it going to get attention? Is it going to do that? Is that my objective? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. For me, it's not because I already have my job that I like. But for other people, it is. Am I looking for distribution? Am I looking for an audience? Am I trying to get it picked up so we can get paid for this? Are you looking for distribution? Is my objective to get into fests? Those kinds of things. And if that's the case, you need to, the end product, am I targeting this toward either a commercial audience that will pay for it, something that will boost my career in some way, shape, or form, or is it an artistic expression that I want to get into festivals? So those are the three questions you have to ask yourself. And otherwise, you might just be making a film for friends, to sit in your living room and watch and enjoy, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I think when we take a look at what is my objective, those are things that you have to, consider when we come in. What are your limitations? Are they money? How much does it cost to produce this? Is it going to be technology? Do you have the right equipment? Is it going to be talent? Who's able to go ahead and do this? I think for a lot of people make independent film, it's attractive to write things that are of a serious narrative, emotional nature, because the resources as far as technology and money don't have to be as great. You literally need 2 chairs and 2 great actors and you've got it. But if you want to do action movies, that does something completely different because they're expensive. But it's a balance. If you're doing action movies, you don't necessarily have to have the deep emotional human drama, because what happens is you have you have life and death circumstance. Then that's your story. You have life and death circumstance, and the action is what fills that in. So it doesn't have to have this, this Adam Driver breaking down and crying on the carpet scene to make that work, because it's different in nature. And it's more simplistic, but more expensive because you've got to go ahead and fill in with quality all that action that comes into play. And that's the case. So, to do the big budget action Hollywood movie, it's expensive to do that. And make that look well. Now, there can be, of course, the mix of the two. And maybe that's the objective sum, but I think a lot of it is just understanding objective. I think you want to be really authentic and real in writing is the thing with me. And I had somebody recently call me the emo filmmaker from Sioux City. I thought that was really funny. Actually, it was really a compliment, because I don't know if it was intended as a shot or a compliment at the time, but I thought it was funny. But I think some of the best writing advice I ever had is a friend of mine. Her name was Kat Hill. She has since passed away, and she was a phenomenal writer. And she said to me, you have to kind of look inside yourself and go to this place that you're afraid to go, and then write from that place. It's like the old Hemingway quote. Hemingway always said, writing's easy. You just you just open a vein and bleed. And that's right. And then you just sit down and then you write that. So, yeah, you've got to kind of go inside this place that you're a little afraid to go. It was whenever Fallen was done, I had one of the actors come up to me, and it was during a scouting trip, and said, "Boy, you're Remy, aren't you?" And that was really a difficult thing for me because I'd never really thought of myself as that character. but the actor knew me well enough that they could go ahead and discern, hey, I see a lot of you in this. And then that was difficult because I had to go back and think, man, maybe I should rewrite some of this. I mean, do I really want to say these things about myself on the screen? And then if you're in this place where you go, well, yeah, I probably should. And it's not because I want to say it about myself, but it's because there's some other person who may actually be able to relate to that. And I think, after The Ghost in Her, the first time we showed it, I had a couple of different women come up to me and they said, I just really wanted to thank you for this because, I felt this way. That happened at the end of Ever Fallen. There was a guy in the crowd and he came up and he gave me a big hug and he said, I just wanted to tell you how much I related to Remy because I felt like that most of my life. And for me, that's success in writing. Yeah, I really care way more about that than any of the other stuff. That be able to go ahead and be able to relate to that. And I think to take people to an emotional place is probably that part of the writing. I went to a really great lecture. Patty Meyer, who is actually head of the MFA program at Loyola Marymount, and my friend Adam Goncharowski, who's a good writer. Adam's good. He actually brought her to Sioux City, and she gave this phenomenal lecture. And I remember she said that great writing is relatable characters going through extraordinary change due to extreme circumstances. And that's true. I mean, you have to be able to relate to the characters to make that work. And then you have to so the person can empathize with that character and be able to say, okay, well, if I was this person, this is what I would do or what I would say. And then you hear that conversation after movies. Well, if I was that character, I would have this. Well, then you've succeeded. I think if you've done that. When we talk about things being emotionally moving, especially horror, and I know people love horror in Iowa. I think when we look at things that are frightening, the thing about that is that if you look at really great international horror movies, they are more cerebral than they are slasher. They're more psychological. So they go like at Suspiria. Nobody remembers Suspiria, but Suspiria was this phenomenal film made in I think it was made in Germany, and it was made in the 1970s. It's terrific, but it's very psychological. And I think that's really the case. A lot of the Swedish movies also very, very scary. I don't know what the Norwegians, like anybody in like Scandinavia, make really terrifying movies. I don't know what's going on in Scandinavia that they're so scary, but they do that. Some of the Japanese horror movies are really, really scary, but they tend to be more cerebral rather than that. So they're more psychological and a little more bent. And I think by watching some of those things, you can kind of understand that. I think too, being able to write anything that feels some kind of sentiment in some way. I know my movies tend to be kind of sad. This next one won't be, but they kind of be kind of sad. I'll jump forward a little bit, but I think you need to write like people speak. I do a lot of writing orally. I write with partners sometimes where we'll hold a conversation back and forth, making it quippy and making it go back and forth. I tell students to watch Gilmore Girls. I know it's dumb. But if you watch Gilmore Girls and watch the pacing of the dialogue in Gilmore Girls, it's very, very smart. So they go back and forth and back and forth. So for example, like a couple lines of dialogues. I think I don't care what you think. And then maybe at a little higher volume than the next time. Well, I was trying to help you. And then maybe the next line is, you were trying to destroy my life. Those kinds of things, Notice the lines are short and they're back and forth. That makes it easier for the editor and easier for the pacing. And I think finally, too, when you write, I think you need to earn your monologue. You need to start with small quip and character building and then kind of earn your monologues as you kind of go through. I don't want to get too much into structure today, but I think that's something that you need to do. And don't have corny monologues. I think that's my issue, like with a lot of the Avengers movies. They've got such corny monologues. It's really difficult to swallow. And you'll notice that if you're watching better things, if you're watching, Academy Award nominated things, you're watching stuff from Film Independent, you're going to notice when you watch a lot of that big budget stuff that a lot of the things that we think are so cool, once we get there, play is kind of corny. So it's that thing of, being able to go ahead and balance that. So I don't know. But before you write, these are just some of the little pieces of advice that I would have. Love to look at great work or answer questions and stuff too, and refer you to people who know a lot more about screenwriting than I do. So anyway, have a happy holiday. Thanks, guys.